Today we're doing a bit of a Austria AAR, and the goal of this run was to create a strong and stable Germany. And I figured Austria would be a really good choice for this because Austria is German and Bohemia is not. And what I've learned recently is that attacking into your own culture group is really powerful because it's super cheap to accept. Basically, I should be able to accept all German cultures without doing any culture conversion. This will let me lean into being really good at religious conversion instead. I'll be going spiritualist. But I also learned recently how aggressive expansion works, and we're going to be talking about how the A tree works as well. Anyhow, if you guys enjoy the content, consider subscribing. I'll, of course, be doing a ton of EU5 content when it comes out. Anyhow, let's get into it. So let's take just a minute to talk about aggressive expansion and how it works. So I didn't know this before. I finally found the place where it shows. The simple of it is it's not too obvious where this is, but I finally found it. So I could see all the things that infect AE reduction. Because we're in Germany, we're going to conquer a lot of land. But what I didn't know is that there's a stat called admin efficiency that I thought wasn't very good because admin efficiency in the game reads, this impacts how quickly a country can implement laws, government reforms, and state privileges. But it also is a one-to-one to aggressive expansion. So it's kind of like I had no idea. I mean, maybe they should be a little bit more clear about that. But the way it works is admin efficiency is basically just a one-to-one to antagonism impact. So that being said, I'm looking at this modifier now and I'm like, cool, whenever we can get that, let's get that. And so what I'm going to do early game is switch my laws to get admin efficiency. And I'm going to do that at the cost of my economy a little bit. I have to choose between proximity costs and admin efficiency. And what I'm actually going to do is pick admin efficiency for the early game and then switch to the proximity cost a bit later. So that's going to be with Parliament, of course, when I can change the laws with Parliament. Also, Diplo reputation affects AE impact. So we have three basic modifiers that all add together to help with AE impact. That's going to be antagonism reduction, admin efficiency, and Diplo rep. And Austria is particularly good with Diplo rep because they have Diplo rep bonuses in their national ideas, which in this game is represented through technology. And one interesting thing about the HRE, if you attack another nation within the HRE, you will get a plus 75% to antagonism taken. So it's a huge debuff. However, if you aren't in the HRE and you attack into the HRE, you won't get any penalty at all. So our first goal with Austria is to simply leave the HRE, which is something I've never actually done before. So we're going to go through that, how that looks. Our first parliament is going to be changing a law and just going after small nations, just going to get a little bit of conquest done. So just kind of going here and taking care of maybe Passau. And these wars are obviously, don't need to talk about it too much. We're a lot stronger than they are. But one thing to note is that I don't want to take stuff that's not German culture. So that means anything south isn't really going to have value for me. So like the German cultures, I'm going to roughly draw what the borders look like. It's like something like this, and then so anything below this line is like not worth it for me to take, and I'm not going to take it. We also start the game with a situation where we have a bunch of land over here that is not integrated, so we're just going to throw it to subjects. It will note somewhat of a glitch. There's an event where if I lose a certain land over here, I lose 20 prestige and 20 legitimacy, or maybe it's 20 stability, something like that. So a pretty bad loss, and it's kind of I say it's a glitch because giving it to a subject shouldn't really count as losing it like that. Or maybe it should. I don't know. I'm not the one to judge. It's something I noticed and I thought, oh, that's kind of strange. So anyways, we also just kind of take Bamberg here. Again, we're just kind of like doing small wars to start with our first parliament, bullying some of these little smaller nations. But we have a kind of interesting idea, and that's that we want to leave the HRE, but to do that, we're going to have to attack the Emperor. And with the Emperor, you can make a peace deal to leave the HRE. Generally speaking, the Emperor will be Bohemia after the first Emperor, which is Upper Bavaria, dies. So ideally, Upper Bavaria will remain the Emperor long enough for me to leave the HRE. However, he often dies to the Black Death. And one other thing is that we can't leave the HRE until the Golden Bull is passed. And that's not going to pass until around the Black Death. So it's kind of like this window where it's like he could die to the Black Death, but if he doesn't, it would be an easier opportunity. But as I'm playing this, I'm just going to go with the RNG that I get, as in I wouldn't reload my save. I'm playing on Iron Man actually, but funny enough, Iron Man actually breaks when the game crashes. I'll get to that in a bit, but it is what it is. I'm sure they're going to fix it. So it's about 1348. Middle of the Black Death, which, isn't a huge deal. We just segregate the infected, and that's totally fine. But we noticed that Upper Bavaria has a lot of allies, and I don't want to fight all those allies at once. He's allied to, just more than I would want to handle. So I actually target Cilicia, who's his ally. I use Parliament to get a claim on Cilicia, and then he's pulled into the war. And this war is actually super tough. There's some really close battles, and I'm lucky that the AI kind of run into a mountain that I was kind of chilling with. I had about like 4K guys, they had 5K, but because they attacked into the mountains, I was able to beat them. But then funny enough, my game crashed and I lost all that data. And that's when I say the Iron Man save actually like broke at that point, which is, again, not a big deal. But then we had to refight the war and kind of get the same conclusion. Without going into too much detail, too tough war. We were able to pull it out, and then we were basically there's a peace deal that we could use on Upper Bavaria that let us leave the HRE. Funny enough, you immediately rejoin the HRE on the month tick. So I had to reload the save and like figure out like, okay, what's going on? I thought I left the HRE. So I guess the way that it works is that if your capital's in the HRE, then you're in the HRE, similar to how it is in EU4. However, I can remove my capital before the month tick, and it's okay. It's just kind of a funny thing. So we're able to figure that out. We get Vienna out of the HRE, and we're now out of the HRE, which means that we don't have to take that super antagonism buff anymore. And so it's going to be super nice. Also, during this time, we get a really nice pulse event. Basically, there's a random event. It's called Our Cause is Just, and it gives you negative 20 antagonism. So it's like this super nice buff. On average, you'll get this event maybe once or twice a campaign. I don't really know what triggers it. Maybe it could be Catholic. I just don't really know. But I noticed it coming up, at least in Europe, not quite a bit, but maybe once or twice a campaign. In my previous campaign in Italy, it came up once as well. So I'm thinking, okay, I have this nice debuff for antagonism. I just left the HRE. I should be able to get into a pretty nice war. And I have 10 years to do so. So what I'm going to do now is improve relations with as many people as possible for the next 5 or 6 years. We wait for another parliament. And then we're going to take land as much as possible. And we're going to use the church buff. The Catholic Church has the ability to get negative 20 antagonism. But the thing with the church is that it's going to have a schism where it like fractures. And during that time, you can't use any of the papal bulls, or I don't know what they're called, but they're kind of like these buffs that you can grant, but they cost 50 religious influence. I tend to just save all my religious influence to use the AE impact one because you don't have like a ton of extra points to use them all or anything like that. But so we're going to have that negative 20% there, and then we're going to have another negative 20% from that random event we just got. Let's say close to 1355. We're going to go to this war. And just to note, the church, we'll call it, closes down in 1360. So we kind of timed this just right. And, this is also a run, like I have a lot of experience in the game, and these are the type of things that I know are going to happen, right? I know the church is going to, I'm not going to be able to use those buffs for a while. So take all that in mind. Like I do understand a bit what I'm doing. So we're going to go to another tough war with Bavaria once again, same opponent. This time Sicily won't join, which is nice, but we have to fight Rhine and Württemberg. Again, of course, I wish I could show gameplay. It was a really pretty interesting war, really, and it was really close. And at some points, we had to like disband our levies and re-recruit levies and that sort of thing. But just to kind of understand what happens is, we're going to be a little bit greedy because of these buffs. And we're like, okay, well, we'll be able to deal with the antagonism a bit later. So we go ahead and just annex this guy over here. I figure it's all German culture, so it doesn't really matter if I can't connect to it right now. I'll put it as subjects, I'll integrate it and all that sort of stuff. And to note, I do have a couple subjects I made earlier from the land over here that I kind of mentioned, right? That's helping out. So these subjects are kind of, running over and helping in the war. But one thing the subjects really do is they kind of distract the AI sometimes. Like the AI wants to siege out the weakest targets in the war first, I think, which in this case is the subjects. So anyhow, we're going to annex these couple people, and we're not going to be able to annex Bavaria and Upper Bavaria because how it works is Lower Bavaria is a subject of Upper Bavaria, but we're going to be able to take almost everything. So probably something like this. And I did forget to mention kind of my goals or like how I'm going to conquer. Though my capital starts in Vienna, but I don't really want to invade non-German land because I couldn't really accept those cultures. So my capital doesn't really start in a great spot for me. But instead, my idea is that I should ally Bohemia, maybe ally Hungary, and then that would kind of prevent them from attacking me. But I'm not able to get any alliances with them. I improve relations with them both, but it doesn't work out. The one thing I'm able to do, though, is get a guarantee from Hungary, which I think I have to pay monthly prestige, but early game prestige isn't super important. So I have to pay, I think, just 0.1 a month for that. And then now I'm being guaranteed by Hungary. And the reason I mention this is because right as we end this war, we get decked by Bohemia. And it's not ideal. Bohemia's got more guys than me and Hungary combined. But the way that I'm able to, I don't want to say win the war because I end up just paying him off, sort of. But the way that we're able to make this work is we're going to group up with Hungary, and he's invading Moravia, and I'm kind of just going to stick with him. And we're going to be able to kind of bully the subjects a bit here, get some war score, win some key battles, and kind of avoid the big death stack that Bohemia has. And once we're able to win a couple of those crucial battles, I'm going to be able to piece him out where I have to pay him a bit of money, which is fine because I don't really think we're going to win in the long term. So, although I do know that Bohemia is going to be an issue in the future, so I'm trying to ally France, but it's not going to work because right now I'm getting coalitioned, and it's really hard to get alliances when you're the target of a coalition. So we're going to have to keep our eye on Bohemia. And just a couple years later, maybe 1370, another war with Bohemia will happen. And remember, we have a lot of antagonism, so we kind of wanted to, wait after we took all that land initially. We don't, we had those crazy buffs for that minute, but we don't have those anymore. I'm not going to go into super big detail about how the next years play out, but more or less, we're going to slowly blob with the idea that I want to make sure I'm always integrating subjects and then I'm always integrating land. So I'm just kind of taking, a lot of these small nations don't have really big allies, right? You can see they're kind of just a bunch of these kind of isolated nations. And so it's not very hard for me to just every parliament make war with one or two of these smaller guys. I do have to deal with Bohemia attacking me time and time again, but it's just the same outcome. It's not really super hard or interesting to talk about. Just we win some key battles and then we can just pay money and that's fine. So that works out. And I think one reason why we're actually able to win these pretty easily is because in this patch, Bohemia has this little subjects because they nerfed subject cap and Bohemia just starts with too many. So I think the plan is that they're gonna like individually fix that with France and Bohemia. So maybe I'm getting in the easier than normal experience. I'm not sure. I still think I'd be able to win the war either way, but I just kind of wanted to mention that. But anyhow, we're able to just improve relations a lot and annex subjects, integrate with our cabinet actions, and just slowly kind of just kind of the same cycle of EU4 that if you guys played EU4 that you're kind of used to, where it's like, okay, you go to war, you take land, and then you wait for your aggressive expansion to cool off. In the meantime, you build up your nation, and you kind of repeat that cycle where, okay, now it's been 10 to 15 years. Let's go take some more land. Let's get people a little bit more upset at us. I like to think of aggressive expansion as a currency, and I want my aggressive expansion to be ticking down. So the idea is that, if you take some land, people get upset, and then that slowly goes down over time. So I want to make sure people are at least a little bit upset with me, so that's always going down. And obviously these modifiers I have are helping a lot. There's one thing that I don't necessarily like, but use a cabinet action that improves your Diplo rep. If you're playing like optimally, you should just assign the cabinet action right at the end of the war. But I don't really like this because I don't feel like that doesn't feel right to me. What I would like to see instead is that this cabinet action takes some time to kind of build up to the Diplo rep. That way you're not just incentivized to put the guy on the action for only like 1 month before you end the war. To be honest, sometimes I forget to do this cabinet action and I end the war beforehand, but it's just kind of like I don't like the idea of that being a thing. Like, oh, whenever I end a war, before I end a war, I should change to a Diplo cabinet action for just like 1 day, and then end the war, and then he can go back to doing whatever else he was doing. So kind of pick up in like the 1400s. And again, it's just kind of this idea of just lobbing out slowly, just going for Germany land. I don't even remember quite the borders that we took, but just the idea that we're taking a bunch of land, and then eventually what happens is to get a civil war, and the AI thinks that's an opportunity to attack me, and so Bohemia attacks me again, but this time I'm not so weak. And one thing that I forgot to mention, and this is actually kind of a major thing, is I end up moving my capital to Munich. And that gives me the option to form Bavaria. More so, I just want the capital to be more in a central location. And so that's kind of why I did it. But then I saw the option to form into Bavaria. And Bavaria actually has a nice modifiers. One of them is war score cost. But I think in hindsight, I shouldn't have done this because Austria has more dynamic historical events. And I think when you form Bavaria, you tank those. So in hindsight, if I would have known that, probably wouldn't want to do that. But really, Bavaria has such a nice color. It's hard to resist. So we did form into Bavaria. And that means no more Austria events, which I think, again, like I don't think Bavaria has a ton of unique events compared to what Austria had. So maybe not the best idea for me to do that. Though around this time, we get attacked by Bohemia again. As I mentioned, there was a civil war. And when I get the civil war, the AI kind of predicts that I'm kind of weak and wants to attack me. And I think this is actually bad logic because the civil wars generally don't last too long. Like you get the land back really fast. It's only in the temporary that because of your temporary situation that AI wants to deck you. So once I finish the civil war, it's like I've been attacked by Bohemia multiple times, but this time I'm strong enough to deal with it. And I'm kind of like, oh man, like I'm kind of annoyed at this point. So I'm just like, okay, I'm going to take Prague. I'm going to take some stuff, even though it's not German. We'll figure it out. So I'm just going to take some land. I just kind of thought like the only reason they declared on me was because of Civil War. I got baited into attacking me when I really wasn't as weak as I appeared. Because now I'm to the point where, it's 1400. I have like 30,000 guys. I've got lots of roads. I've moved my capital to a more central location, so I'm getting a lot more value. And I want to take a minute to explain the culture situation because I actually learned a lot about culture in this run. And in a way, I don't like some of the mechanics, how they work. But again, we're just going to go into that. So later on, I go ahead and annex Bohemia. And I'm talking like, maybe 50 years later, not anything soon. But we have this idea of like, okay, we need to accept this different culture, right? The way that cultures work is that if you get the culture to be friendlier with you, it's cheaper in DiploCap. So German culture will only cost me 0.15 to accept, but it's similar if I can get a culture to kindred, I believe it is. So I think it's like there's multiple levels, but the more they like you, the better. So let's say that at kindred it's 0.15. And at friendly, maybe it's like 0.5, and at like neutral, you get the point. It basically is more and more culture capacity, but there's a couple weird ways that you can improve cultural opinion. And I end up having Silesia, Moravia, and Bohemian culture that I have to get accepted. And I'm just going to kind of go through the ways you can do this. And so the way this works with improving cultural opinion is it has to be the dominant person of that culture. So whoever has the most pops of that culture. And since we've annexed Bohemia, if we release a subject, that's going to be the dominant culture. And then once every 50 years, you can use a subject action to improve cultural opinion. So like pretty long cooldown. And so that's one way you can do it. Another way is that if you get 50 favors with that cultural head, you can trade favors for 50 favors. And so one thing I tried in this campaign is kind of just releasing these small subjects and then canceling them as subjects, allying them, and then currying favors and sending gifts and that sort of thing to be able to do that, which I didn't really like that you could do that, honestly. Like, it's something I was kind of just messing with, and I'm like, it kind of seems a little cheesy. But similarly, I was testing this out with Poland and Hungary, and if you send a big gift to anyone really, you get 10 favors, and you can do this every 10 years. So in theory, all you have to do is send gifts every 10 years, 5 times 50 years, and you can also make that work. But it was kind of weird because I didn't even ally to Hungary or Poland. It's just kind of like, oh, if you send a bunch of gifts, you can do this, and then you can, it kind of enables you to conquer that land because you can accept the culture. You don't have to culture convert, and that's going to be super helpful. Anyways, I just kind of want to explain how that worked, and I thought it felt kind of weird. If I'm being honest, I don't really like it. Just the idea that like, oh, you can just have these cultures accepted for free. All you got to do is like improve relations with or ally to these people, and then get enough favors, and then it all of a sudden fixes your diplo cap issue, or sorry, your culture cap issue. So not a huge fan of that. It is what it is, though. I'm not. It's fine. It just feels a little bit like gamey. I don't know the word for it, but it feels a little bit strange. Without going into a crazy amount of detail, we get coalition by a lot of people, and that can be kind of make conquest faster. I mean, we started at 1337, so by the time we actually formed Germany, it is like 200 years, a bit over. But yeah, at the end, we kind of attack into like a large coalitions, and we kind of just say like, oh, AE is just a number. Like, who cares? Like, we have like pretty big armies, that sort of thing. And it becomes a very similar style. Again, that kind of loop. And that's why I actually made a video or the people like really didn't like, where I was like, this kind of feels like a U4, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but just the idea of this kind of loop where it's like, you conquer land, you have an era of peace, you build up, you conquer land, you have an era of peace, you build up. And that feels like a very similar gameplay loop to EU4. And the more that I play EU5, the more that kind of feeling of the gameplay loop of that is very similar to how it was in EU4. And some people might think this is a bad thing, but I'm not trying to paint this as a bad thing. I like EU4. It's a great game. So me saying that it's similar to EU4 is not me shit-talking the game or anything like that. It's also not like trying to be clickbaity. Like, people kind of accuse me in one of my live streams of, I said something like, oh, the game's very similar to EU4, and people kind of like freaked out. I'm like, no, genuinely it is. It's in clickbait. I'm not being negative. Reddit and the forums could be a dangerous place. Anyhow, we're not going to go into too many details of what we did. And again, I actually tanked all my dynamic historical events, so I didn't really get to see a lot of the events from Austria, unfortunately, because I formed Bavaria, I think, in the late 1300s. And to know, the only really thing that Austria got that was actually really useful, though, is Austria gets more admin efficiency as one of their unique things. So Austria is this like really weird giga good nation for conquest because they have both admin efficiency and diplo rep, which are two things that directly affect aggressive expansion impact. But I just want to talk about a little bit of stuff a little bit after that. So yeah, it's just a lot of blobbing, a lot of that similar gameplay loop. Eventually we attack into the coalition, and that's a very strange mechanic to me, the attacking into the coalition. Just to give you guys some context of how that works, is that if you attack into the coalition, you can separate piece them, but it will cost you 66% more war score to do so. And speaking of kind of this idea of attacking secondary targets, I thought it's very strange that if you don't co-belligerate a target and you take their land, there's no extra antagonism impact for that. The only thing that happens is it costs 66% more war score to take the land, which I think it should also cost more antagonism, because I think in EU4 that's the case, right? You shouldn't be able to just take land non-co-belligerated in the H3 and not be extremely punished. We'll kind of get to more of the feedback towards the end. I did want to mention that the church kind of reopens in 1400, which just means that the schism disaster ends, and then we can use that 20 AE event. It's a pretty handy one. It's like the best thing the Catholic has going for it. But eventually we do switch to Protestant anyways, because Protestant has proximity impact, but also has 10 antagonism. So it's not quite as good for antagonism, but it has just better stuff. Protestant's probably my favorite religion, just as far as the buffs that it has. Again, I kind of just want to take you to a bit of the later parts where I kind of, playing around with some random stuff that I kind of noted. And then we'll kind of talk about some feedback over the run. And I did really enjoy this run. I had a lot of fun with it. And I think that I'm getting better and better, and this is my best performance as far as, just taking a lot of land and being pretty strong. So anyhow, going into the later parts of the 1500s is where I think you hit the biggest power spikes. So something about this campaign and in general, maybe we'll talk about more in the end of the video, but I use subjects a lot to core stuff, but it becomes really tedious to me. And then I kind of just like, even though it's more optimal, I kind of don't do it because it just feels kind of tedious to keep making subjects and then annexing them. I don't really like the idea of like kind of using subjects as just of a way to integrate faster. I don't like it mechanically, but anyway, that's not that important to tell you, but just kind of like the idea that I could have cored stuff more optimally, but I'm being kind of lazy or whatever you want to call it. We're able to completely core like all of Germany and really get lots of control pushed in it by like the late 1500s. And also in the 1500s, you hit these massive power spikes with workshops, which I think might be a little bit too strong. Tools workshop, weapons workshop, it's all these workshops give much more production on certain things. And I guess without going into too many details is just to say that like by the early 1600s, not getting into too many details, we probably make at least, like 3 to 4K extra a month, meaning that that's after expenses. This results in just like, so much money, especially during parliament taxes. This probably goes up to like, 8K a month. And you can see how that just gets crazy. And, we test a couple things that I was a little bit, just kind of like, oh, well, the campaign's kind of over, but I want to test some weird stuff just for fun. And so what I ended up doing just, kind of randomly is first I recruit up 1 million troops and it's all infantry. So I just recruit 1 million infantry. But I found a really interesting thing. It's like a macro builder. So I thought there was no macro builder, but there's kind of a macro builder. From each location, you can recruit units, but normally it's one at a time. So I didn't think it was great. Like, okay, you could recruit 25 units from Vienna, but that's going to take forever. But in the Age of Reformation, the military building actually increases the number of troops you can recruit at a time. So it kind of makes macro builder really nice and actually useful. So like that's a W. I didn't know it existed. I'm like, okay, that's awesome. So it's like not that hard for me to recruit 1 million troops, right? So anyway, yeah, we have 1 million troops. The first thing I want to try with 1 million troops is I send 1 million troops to like some OPM, something like this. Like I own most of Germany, obviously. I've formed Germany, but it doesn't work. I try to starve people. It doesn't work. It's simple, but we stack 1 million troops. It's kind of weird you don't really take attrition for doing that, or not much. Like you would think that would be a lot, right? But anyways, I found out this really broken cheese that you can use when I'm just messing around. Because I have 1 million troops, and I just set carpet siege to 1 million troops in France. And it's funny, like I just assault every single fort. They were balancing armies, so I'm hoping you won't be able to do that. But in the current iteration of the game, I just build only infantry and I assault every single fort always. And so I want them to change that in the sense that that's still good and easy. And I think going forward, what I'm going to do is just don't assault forts until they fix that. So I'm just going to make that a rule like, hey, you can't assault forts. It's too strong. And that will incentivize me to build other units. But anyways, the thing that we do against France that's super, super busted is we just take 3 locations from him and it ruins his entire economy. I want you to imagine this white dot is Paris. I know it's not. It's just that the record, the screenshot I'm using doesn't extend that far. But we're going to take 3 locations that surround Paris, something like that. And now his entire nation has 0 proximity. Like it's completely tanked. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so broken. I'm not going to do this in my campaigns because it's so disgustingly broken. This literally tanks him completely. Basically, like you can take 3 locations from France and it's over for him. He's going to go bankrupt. He has 0 control in his entire nation except Paris, which is literally the only thing that gets any proximity. I'm not going to use this exploit. I just kind of like found it because I was playing around at this point. And that's one of those things that's like, I don't even know how they solve that. I'm just going to not do that because, again, I was kind of just like, oh, I have infinite money and I have 1 million men. Let's just see what happens. So anyways, just want to note that I think the part of the issue and maybe something in general is that taking land without having to connect to it creates cheesy scenarios like this, unfortunately, where if you had to take land and you had to connect to it, it would be much better. But anyways, it's not really something I know how they would tackle. I'm just not going to use it. It's very, very cheesy because it just tanks the entirety of their control to 0 except for the capital, which is, yeah. Anyhow, just thought I'd mention it. Not sure how you can solve it. But I kind of wanted to discuss a couple things about this run and just kind of some things that maybe some wish list items for the game. I had a lot of fun playing this run and forming Germany and, becoming really strong, becoming really wealthy, all that sort of stuff. And there was a lot of challenging wars early in the campaign. Part of the issue, though, is that the AI is just not that great right now. And in my opinion, this boils down to like a couple different problems. But I think one of the issues is that the AI really doesn't understand how to integrate, or rather, I call it integrate, what I mean core. And with cores, you get 20 control. So it's quite good. It's quite a bit of control. Whereas with the integrate, you only get 5. So it's significantly worse. And when I look into the AI, they're not really great at doing this because I think that coring is too complex because you have to have a majority of the culture and religion and integrate. So it's almost like this 3-pronged thing where it's like the AI can't really figure out, oh, he needs to like culture convert or accept cultures and religious convert. Also, one thing to mention is that just having really, really high spiritualist and some other nice reforms basically passively converts your nation for you. Like I haven't really converted anything in my campaign in 1616. I went Protestant, I don't know, maybe like 30 years ago, and I'm 80% Protestant already because it seems to have like a passive conversion to every location. But again, that's me stacking spiritualists very high. What I think they should do is just simplify coring to just integrate and simplify it for the AI. Because if not, then the player's just getting such a big advantage because if the AI doesn't understand how to do all these fancy stuff to get the core, then they're kind of just not going to have cores, and then they're not going to get value from expanding. Then you have a situation where the player becomes so much stronger. And for some context, in the game, I played until 1616. Even though I was just kind of playing around towards the end. I have a million guys, like a million standing army. The next nation behind me has 66,000. So it's like I literally have more troops than probably the entirety of the world combined by a lot. For example, Castile, I haven't really interacted with Castile all this game, but he has 28,000 troops. I have a million. You can see that's like not even close. So it's problematic. So I think maybe if they help the AI with the integration thing, I also think, I've always said this, you guys know this, is that I think Parliament is just like too strong for the player. And I've had some ideas that, of course, these are just my ideas and they'll never mean anything because it is what it is. But my ideas would be the way that you get claims would instead, and this is the way that I hope would benefit the AI. But instead of giving you a claim on any provinces that you want, what it should do is make the next no CB so it doesn't cost you stability and stuff like that. And that way it would help the AI as well, because if they get that, the AI prefers to attack with no CB as their main war goal, and they take a lot of punishment from doing that. And also with the parliament taxes, I think if they just gave you like a buff, like a tax efficiency buff instead, that'd be really useful for the AI, because that way they don't have to worry about like overtax. Because as a player, you basically just want to overtax your people for a year, and then it's fine. They're not going to like revolt within a year, but the AI is not going to do that because the AI doesn't want to piss off its people. So it's kind of one of those things. It's like, well, I would like it if the AI would get some value there, or if the player just it's basically just like the parliament's just like a cheat code for the player. But I'm being a dead horse at this point. I know I talk about this like every time. I also did want to address though the just the antagonism modifiers, where I'm like, I think they need to tone these down. It's just I want to run into some opposition. I feel like I just conquer too fast, and there's nothing to stop me. In general, I think EU5 is a much easier game once you understand it than EU4, and I don't like that about it. The AI just doesn't really seem to have any challenge for you. Like in EU4, there'd probably be like a strong Russia, a strong Ottomans, maybe a strong France, maybe even Scandinavia. Who knows, right? But basically in EU5, there's like no one really becomes that strong end game threat, and I would love that to be changed. Maybe it will be. And they're definitely working on the game. They're working on the AI. I know that, but you have to be a little bit concerned about those type of things, right? Where it's kind of just like you don't really have a reason to play because you're so much stronger than anybody else. And most of my campaigns will end either in the late 1500s, maybe early 1600s, but most of the time I feel like around that time period. And my dream for the game would be that I don't run into the scenario where I'm so strong that happens, or at least not this early. Maybe in the late 1700s that'd be okay, but like I understand I'm playing Austria and they're one of the strongest nations in the game, and so maybe that's intended. But I think it would be cool if even as Austria, I was able to play into the later parts of the game while I still felt like I had decent competition. And there's probably ways I can do that. Maybe I can plan very hard. I haven't really loved the idea very hard because I don't like the idea of just giving the AI cheats. But there's probably other restrictions I can impose on myself that will make this a bit easier. Maybe I shouldn't allow myself to have any admin efficiency, or any type of self restriction might work to make the game a little bit more challenging. Anyhow, I know I'm getting a bit carried away with a rant and all that type of stuff. I just would like to see the game be a little bit more challenging. Again, I have played the game a lot. I understand the game pretty well, but I do feel that, in comparison to EU4, I have way more hours in EU4, right? And EU4 is not this crazy hard game, but in EU4, it's just like, if you're playing in Arabia in EU4, you better be ready for the Mamluks, right? They're going to kill you. Like, that's not going to happen in EU5. Like, Egypt's not going to go down and murder you. Like that, the AI just isn't very aggressive in that sort of sense. And I think it might be, again, I don't know everything. I don't know why it's that way, but I would just like a little bit more of a threat from the AI sometimes. But we'll just have to see how that all pans out. At any rate, I'm really enjoying the game. That's just my kind of one critique. Like, the early game is so much fun. And that's why I say it's similar to EU4 in that sense, where it's like EU4 is a ton of fun early on, and then you kind of hit that point, and that feels very similar to the cycle. Maybe that's okay. Anyhow, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Don't take anything I say too seriously. I'm just a person with an opinion. And, thanks for watching.